What's up everybody, and welcome into another Ableton live tutorial video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Jacob. I'm a local worship leader and keyboard player in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm also the worship leader at an incredible new church plant called Factory Church in Concord, North Carolina, which is just north of Charlotte. I know in our services every week I use this Akai MPK 249 with my computer and Ableton to run multi-tracks, to fire click tracks, do all kinds of crazy things to control Ableton. So I wanted to make a dedicated video on how to set up a MIDI keyboard, what cables to use, what preferences you have to change within Ableton Live, all of the things that go along with that. That way you guys can take your keyboard controllers, MIDI controllers, whatever the case may be, and use it in Ableton Live in your services as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first step is going to be getting signal from your MIDI keyboard to your computer. The easiest way and the most common way of doing this on most MIDI controllers and MIDI keyboards alike is via USB. So if you see here on my Akai MPK 249, I have a USB cable that comes out of here, goes USB to my laptop over here and plugs in, and I'm good to go. The laptop will power the Akai MPK 249 because it is bus powered. Your second option is if you want to use 5-pin MIDI. So a 5-pin MIDI cable are these two connections right here next to this USB port, and this is useful if you want to hook up an older piece of gear like an older keyboard that has 5-pin MIDI, or if you want to use it with like a Kemper Profiler amp module to send tempo changes from Ableton to that Kemper for delays and reverbs and things such as that. So the only downside to that is you have to have a way to convert the 5-pin MIDI to USB. The easiest way to do that is a product called an iConnectivity MIDI 4 Plus. It has 5-pin MIDI ports on the front of it, so you'd come out of the keyboard 5-pin MIDI into the iConnectivity, and then out of the iConnectivity into your computer via USB. So now that we've got our keyboard connected up over USB, it's bus powered, it's powered on, as you can see here, we're gonna hop over to Ableton Live's preferences and see what we need to change and look at in there before we start assigning and mapping things. So let's do that now. Okay, so the first thing I wanna do is jump into Ableton Live's preferences. We have our keyboard hooked up, it's powered on, it's ready to go. So now let's go over here to Live and Preferences, and you're going to go to this Link MIDI tab right here. And here you're going to see that Ableton has already seen this controller when I plugged it in under this Control Surface tab. You see it says MPK 249 input and output is auto assigned. So what this Control Surface area is doing is it essentially auto maps certain functions of this MIDI keyboard to Ableton by default. So let me show you an example of that. If I click out of preferences and I go over here and I move fader number 3, you see down here on audio channel number 3 in Ableton, now I have control over that fader. Same for fader number 4. And same for the rotary knobs are control pan by default. And so this is useful if you're just going for a plug and play kind of thing. The problem is you can't control what is assigned to these physical faders in Ableton. So this is always going to be channel number 3. This is always going to be controlling channel number 4 in Ableton. So this really doesn't give us a whole lot of flexibility when we're trying to map certain things from the controller to Ableton. So I would always recommend just disabling the Control Surface feature. So you just go over here back to Preferences and hit None. Whoops, None on both of these. And then that way you don't have to worry about things being auto mapped. You can choose exactly what you want to control and what buttons you want to control what things inside of Ableton. So the next area I want to look at is down here in this MIDI ports area. So under these MIDI ports, we're going to find the keyboard that you plugged in. In my case, it's an MPK 249. You see the input right here, and down here is the output of the MPK 249. For the purposes of this video, we're focused on the input. Output is useful if you want to send like MIDI clock data back from Ableton to the MIDI controller, but there's no sense in getting into all of that right now. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go up here to the MPK 249 input, and you'll see there's 3 options under all of these MIDI inputs: track, sync, and remote. So track enables you to play and control instruments inside of Ableton Live, virtual instruments like Native Instruments the Giant. So if I were to turn on track, that would allow me then to play this keyboard and it control a virtual instrument like the Giant or Omnisphere or whatever other virtual instrument plugin that you have. The second function I want to talk about is sync. Sync is useful if your keyboard controller has a tap tempo button like this Akai MPK 249 has, where you can hit this tap tempo and it'll send that tempo data from your keyboard to Ableton, and that way you can set the tempo of Ableton using your MIDI controller. So what I want to do now is I typically just turn on track and remote. Sync I usually don't mess with because I want my tempo data to come from Ableton only. I don't want me to be able to tap tempo in on the MIDI keyboard. That's totally up to you if that's a function that you think you need. In my case, I don't use it. So we'll have track and remote on. This allows it so that in track mode, I can play MIDI instruments like Omnisphere and the Giant and things such as that. And if remote mode is on, that means I can map anything on this entire control surface to be able to control anything inside of Ableton Live. So now, in order to start mapping things, if you go up to this button up here in the top right of Ableton that says MIDI and click that, now you are in what Ableton calls MIDI map mode. So if I were to click this fader down here, track number 3, if I were to click on this fader and I want fader 1 to control this fader on my keyboard controller, I'd click it and then I'd move fader 1 on my keyboard controller. And you see it has a 1 out of 12, which means that I've just assigned this fader, this physical fader on my keyboard, to this virtual fader in Ableton Live. So if I were to turn off MIDI map mode and now move fader number 1, and now I am good to go. And fader number 1 is now mapped to track number 3. So I can go through this and do this for any fader. So I'll do fader number 4 now, move it, now it's assigned. I'll click the pan knob, move rotary 1, and now that's assigned. Click the second pan knob, move rotary 2, and now I can pan on track 4 down here. I can pan on track 1. I can control volume on those 2 using faders 1 and 2 of my physical keyboard. And so you can do this for anything across the entire physical keyboard, and you can go through and map things exactly as you want them. You can map a play button to be any button on here, a stop button to be any button on your keyboard. However you want to run things, you can set it up to run them that way. One other thing I want to show you inside of MIDI map mode is if you go over here to where Live's browser usually is, you get to see, when you're MIDI map mode, you get to see the mappings that you've made. So you can see that CC12 is assigned, CC note number 12 is assigned to audio 3, CC13 to audio 4, CC22 to audio 3, so on and so forth. And so here, if you need to delete a mapping, you can click this and just hit delete, and boom, you've deleted that mapping, and now I no longer have control of fader number 3 with my first fader like I did earlier on the Akai. So that's how you can go in and delete mappings as well. Anything you see in purple here are things inside of Ableton Live that you can assign physical MIDI controls to. So you can do the play button, the record button, you can do these slots. If you run Ableton Live in session view, you can do these where each slot could be a different pad on your keyboard controller where it launches a different song. So pad 1 can be track 1, pad 2 can be track 2, so on and so forth. Any way you want to set this up, you can set it up that way. So one other thing I want to talk about in preferences real quick is this mode right here called takeover mode. So there's 3 options here, right? So you have none, and you have pickup, and you have value scaling. So if this is set to none, when you touch the fader on your keyboard, that fader is assigned to an Ableton, the Ableton fader will jump to the physical location of the fader on your keyboard. So let me show an example of that. So if you look down here at channel number 3, if I take this fader control and put it at 0 right now, just like this, if you see on my actual physical Akai keyboard, the fader is all the way down. If I touch this fader on my Akai, watch fader number 3 inside of Ableton Live. See how it jumped? It jumped all the way back down to 0. This can be a little bit dangerous because if you're playing a sound and you touch your fader and it's not in the same place as the virtual fader inside of Ableton, it's going to jump and it's going to sound like an abrupt change. So that's what none mode is. Now the second mode is pickup. So now you see I will put this fader at 0, right? At 0 on channel number 3. My fader on the board is almost all the way up. Now, if I start to move, you see this yellow box come up down here and it says track volume is awaiting pickup. So that volume fader in Ableton won't move until I catch up with it physically with my fader on the keyboard. So if I get down to 0, boom, now it's caught up and now I have control. So if at any point these get out of sync, the sound won't jump, it just won't move until you catch up to where it is. So now it's caught up there, and now we're good to go. So that is pickup mode. The last mode is called value scaling. So value scaling, which, like I said, pickup mode, I like to use, a lot of people like to use value scaling. It's totally up to you. So value scaling with this option, no matter where your physical keyboard fader is at, you can pick up and start controlling the fader in Ableton that it's assigned to. So let me show you that real quick. I'm going to grab the physical fader 1 that's assigned to this channel on my Akai, and I'm going to start to move it. And you see I'm moving my physical fader on my keyboard very little, but it's moving very fast inside of Ableton because it's trying to catch up to where it's supposed to be. And then once it's caught up, it smooths out, and now I have smooth control all the way from as loud as it can go all the way down to as soft as it can go. So value scaling is nice. There's no jump in the notes. It's just wherever you start moving the fader, it'll scale itself volume wise until it catches up with it in the where the actual fader is in Ableton, and then it's caught up and then you have full control again. So like I said, it's totally up to you which one of those you want to use. For right now, I'm going to leave mine on pickup, but you know, that's totally preference. So I hope that all made sense and that you have a good understanding now of how to get your MIDI mappings from your MIDI controller to Ableton Live. If you have any other questions at all, definitely leave me a comment down below and I will answer all of them. Also, if you would like and subscribe to this video, if you did enjoy the content, I'll be making a bunch more stuff like Ableton tutorials, main stage tutorials, worship covers. And also be sure to check out the past videos. I have some other Ableton tutorials as well as some different main stage and worship covers on the channel already. Thank you guys for the support. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.